An American soldier stationed in South Korea appears to have escaped into North Korea, effectively becoming a defector. It seems that he was involved in some fights in Seoul, and he had been previously arrested for assault. He was about to be arrested again or deported to the US, and that seems to be the reason why he wanted to escape. But going to North Korea is a bit of a risky proposition. Yes, he's African American, by the way. That raises a few interesting questions. First, about all those American soldiers stationed all over the world, and in particular in Asian countries. Many times they are involved in crimes and are resented by the local population. In Japan, there were more than a few cases of rape committed by American soldiers. And when it's not rape, it's just general antisocial activity. This seems to be common in South Korea too. But many times nothing happens to them because they obey to different legislation. They are under the jurisdiction of the US law. In Italy, in the American base in Aviano, a drunk driving female soldier ran over a kid last year, killing him. She's probably going to be sent back to the US and never persecuted, as it already happened in a very similar case before that. But in this case, well, the soldier went to North Korea, and of course they don't have extradition treaties with the US, and it's not sure what will happen to him there. North Korea is a very interesting and mysterious country. No one knows very well what goes on in there. According to the American propaganda, it is some kind of communist hellhole where people are put in prison camps, killed and tortured for no reason. But that doesn't seem to be exactly the case. A few images that leak from there now and then show a more or less normal, if a bit old-fashioned and not very prosperous society. I'm not a big fan of communism. I think it's an awful political system, and I'm not a big fan of authoritarian regimes in general. On the other hand, the modern liberal West isn't that great either. In some ways, the rigidity of communism worked as a time capsule to protect the population from the worst changes of the 20th century. Just look at Eastern Europe. The reason that they have less immigration and are in general more socially conservative is really because they were under communist occupation for a long time, and thus isolated from Western influence, money and propaganda. And just look at the way people dress. These are some pictures of women in North Korea. In North Korea, people are not rich. They mostly ride bicycles to get around, but they still seem to dress with a certain elegance. Just compare it with anywhere in the West, or even with South Korea. South Korea is obviously more prosperous, but also much more westernized. It's interesting to compare both worlds. On one hand, you have places like North Korea, or even China, where the state controls basically everything in society. Now, of course, China is no longer a communist country in any significant way. People can own property, and there are even many Chinese billionaires. But it's still a very controlled system where people are not allowed to do many things with authorization, bad policies such as the social credit system, and of course some of the worst lockdowns in the world during COVID took place in China. On the other hand, the West tried, at least for a while, I think this is changing now, total freedom. But it turns out that when given total freedom, most people don't really know what to do with it. They are just interested in watching Netflix or porn, doing drugs or eating too much, and being brainwashed by big corporations. It seems to me that freedom, when lacking a coherent moral system as a frame around it, is not that great. A big problem in the West is the mass media, which is constantly propagating bad behavior and bad ideas to the people, and basically saying that bad is good and black is white. But even most churches in the West today, they just regurgitate liberal propaganda. They are not that much different from Netflix. Supposedly, North Korea is an atheist state where religion is forbidden and religious people are persecuted. But I am not sure how much of that is true and how much of that is propaganda. There is even a Catholic church in Pyongyang. There are about 1,000 Catholics in the city. And according to this state official, they have complete freedom of religion. who knows?
그래서 우리 지금 뭐 종교 자유가 없다 뭐 이런데 우리 지금 오랜 신자들이나 또 신자분이 그 자녀들 나 자신도 우리 부모들이 신자였으니까 그 부모들이 그 뜻을 이어서 지금 이렇게 신앙생활을 하는데 그 이렇게 신앙생활 하는 거를 우리는 자유롭게 또 자기 희망에 따라 진행합니다. 그다음에 여기 이제 외국인들이 많은 외국인들이 왔다 가면서 우리 신자들이 자기 참다운 신앙생활을 하는 데 대해서 보고 다 이제 느끼고 가고 갑니다.
This is from a previous video in a Catholic church in North Korea. Look at the choir singing. Today in the West, that's very rare. Catholic churches are completely modernized and usually empty. To find anything similar to that, you have to go to a small church that still does the traditional Mass. But there are not that many of those around. So yes, North Korea is basically a time capsule. Perhaps not the best place in the world to be, but probably also not the worst. And yes, they do have some beautiful women.